First reported wrestling match dates back to the 19th century on February 27th, 1880, in front of a crowd of 1,100 at Horticultural Hall, which was a large Victorian-era looking exhibition building built in 1876 for Philadelphia celebrating the nation's centennial. The only match reported was Professor William Miller versus Theobald Bauer, if I'm pronouncing that second name correctly, who was also known as the world's first ever and simply known as the Masked Wrestler. Miller defeated Bauer in a 2 out of 3 falls match, 2-1, with the prize being $500. The Horticultural Hall sadly met its demise by Hurricane Hazel in 1954. Due to so many glass window panes were blown out, the city ended up considering it a loss and eventually tore it down. According to the website WrestlingData.com, which I will credit for the majority of these 19th and very early 20th century wrestling results, besides Horticultural Hall in 1880, one other wrestling show took place in the 19th century on April 7, 1883 at Pastime Park. One match reported, American heavyweight wrestling champion Joe Action defeated Tom Connors. The only one reference I could find to this Pastime Park was on an obscure website about amusement parks at rcdb.com, apparently an abbreviation of Roller Coasters Database. And only that Pastime Park existed from 1881 to 1893. The website also says Pastime Park was later renamed Washington Park, with several different prefixes and ownership names between 1895 and 1911. Confirming the existence or exact location of Pastime or Washington Park in Philadelphia has proven difficult, with only WrestlingData.com or RCDB.com for proof of existence. The Philadelphia Ice Palace and Auditorium, eventually abbreviated to the Philadelphia Arena. This historical venue will receive its own chapter in the History of Wrestling in Philadelphia project. The reason for this early entry is having the first written record of the original World Heavyweight Wrestling Championship being defended in Philadelphia long before the National Wrestling Alliance, American Wrestling Association, or Worldwide Wrestling Federation. What we historically now remember as the Philadelphia Arena opened on February 20th, 1920 as the Philadelphia Ice Palace and Auditorium, which was located at 4530 Market Street in West Philadelphia. The venue could hold several thousand for an attendance, as evident in its first wrestling show in 1925 with a crowd of 8,000. Future records prove it could hold more than 10,000. The April 15th, 1925 show featured the 5th and 6th wrestlers who ever held the original World Heavyweight Championship. Stanislaus Zbyszko would defeat Wayne Munn in a 2 out of 3 falls match. This would be Zbyszko's second run as champion. This was the first wrestling title change in Philadelphia. By the way, the wrestler you know today as Larry Zbyszko took his name from Stanislaus, but was not related. The arena would host many wrestling shows through the coming decades, and eventually the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in the 1960s through early 1970s. You know today as the WWE. There's a lot more history to this historic venue that I will share in its own chapter. Sadly, it met its demise by an arson fire in 1983. The most unusual venue I found wrestling took place in Philadelphia was or is at 858 North Broad Street and still exists today as a church. The Metropolitan Opera House was built in 1908. In 1930, it turned into a ballroom after being purchased by a sports promoter. The Met, which it became referred as, hosted 42 wrestling shows between 1926 to 1954. The first wrestling show at the Met was Friday, January 29, 1926, featuring Stanislaus Zbyszko and Jim Lundas. A few weeks later, on February 12th, 6,000 in attendance witnessed 3 times World Heavyweight Champion Joe Stetcher retain his title in a 1 hour 46-minute match. The last wrestling show to take place at the Metropolitan Opera House, or the Met, was July 26, 1954. 2 historical names wrestled that night, the original Nature Boy Buddy Rogers and Don Leo Jonathan. Wrestling's first taste of outdoor atmosphere was June 10, 1926 at Municipal Stadium. It was known as Municipal Stadium from 1926 through 1964. Then renamed, it would be far more historically known as JFK Stadium. Although Municipal Stadium was a huge venue for Philadelphia, only 4 wrestling shows took place there between 1926 through 1931. The summer show in 1930 on August 29 saw a crowd of 30,000. Those 30,000 would witness history they were probably unaware of. The tournament final match, and the birth of the National Wrestling Association, the precursor of the National Wrestling Alliance we know today. The match was Richard or Dick Chicat defeat Ed the Greek Lundos after a 1 hour and 15-minute match to win the New York State Athletic World Heavyweight Championship, though in historic records now be considered the National Wrestling Association World title. As mentioned before, Municipal Stadium, later renamed JFK for the slain president in 1964, its most notable event was in 1985 when it hosted the Live Aid concert. Eventually it was torn down after decades of usage. Its land became home to the eventual new arena that would replace the also aging Philadelphia Spectrum. Municipal Stadium would not be Philadelphia's only taste of watching wrestling outside. The Baker Bowl, a baseball stadium once located at 2622 North Broad Street, or 2601 North 15th Street, built in 1887, named after a one-time owner of the Philadelphia Phillies baseball team. This site would host 6 wrestling shows between 1927 through 1932. You gotta bet Babe Ruth made an appearance at this stadium too. The second show at Baker Bowl, June 6, 1930, with 20,000 in attendance, saw Jim Lundos retake the World Heavyweight Championship from Dick Sakat in a 1 hour 23-minute match, whom he lost to at Municipal Stadium the previous summer. New Broadway Athletic Club, located in South Philadelphia at Broad and Christian Streets, a boxing venue, hosted one wrestling show, October 21st, 1927, and featured Stanless Zabisco. Philadelphia Civic Center, Convention Hall, formerly at 3400 Civic Center Boulevard across from Children's Hospital. Today we remember Convention Hall as the home for Jim Crockett Promotions from 1985 through 1988 and under WCW ownership through 1996. But again, as this project has stated, this venue hosted wrestling decades far before. 1931 through 1962, Convention Hall would host many World Heavyweight Championship matches, title changes, and see major legends we now consider the pioneers. And this was many years before Jim Crockett Jr. and Dusty Rhodes expanded out of Mid-Atlantic territory to the northeastern United States, such as Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or New York in 1984 and 1985. A lost venue I found that hosted wrestling in Philadelphia was the Broadwood Hotel at North Broad and Wood Street in Center City. Existing from the 1920s through 1970s, it hosted wrestling shows during the 1940s. It would include design name changes such as hotel, auditorium, and athletic club. Another boxing venue rather than obscure wrestling venue, the Olympia Club at Broad Street in Bainbridge. It hosted 14 wrestling shows in 1944. That would look back at the venues that hosted during the golden age of wrestling in Philadelphia. There are places that hosted wrestling during the modern era, some of which were shown or mentioned here, such as the original arena, the Civic Center Convention Hall, and the Spectrum. All went through their own name changes through the years, and you will see them next with their own chapters in the history of wrestling in Philadelphia.